ಇರ್ಲಿ ಮ್ಯಾಮ್, ಏನ್ ತೊಂದ್ರೆ
ನೀವು ಒಂದೇ ಗಲಾಟೆ ಅವ್ರ ಮಕ್ಳನ್ನ ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡ್ಬಂದ್ಬಿಡ್ಲಿ, ನಮ್ಮ ಮಕ್ಳು ರೆಕಾರ್ಡ್
Am I audible? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I kindly request all of you to please mute so that we can start off the session.
Papa? Papa? Papa?
Wait.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon to one and all. A very warm welcome to you for this fourth day of this webinar series on research methodology. Now, throughout these days, 3 days, what we did, the first day we tried to find out what is the meaning of conceptualization. We tried to find out what is theory, and we also tried to find out what exactly we mean by a concept, dimension, as well as a variable. So these are the three things that we tried, and we understood it in the first session. The entire introduction of what are the types of research, that is qualitative research and quantitative research. Now, in the second session, the focus was mainly on trying to find out what exactly is the title of your research, that is, how do you entirely frame a particular topic, and also we tried to analyze like how do you frame the hypothesis, what is that you do when it comes to a conceptual model, what are the questions, research questions that a researcher needs to frame, and ultimately how is that you have to frame your objectives. So this is what you need to know when it comes to the entire planning process. So the planning process mainly comprises of your title, how is that you relate your constructs. The second important thing is how you are able to form a conceptual model based on your entire research. The third important thing what you need to know is try to keep a basis working hypothesis for your research. That means to say the entire research must be based on a statement. Okay, now this is called as your research hypothesis or a working hypothesis which you will be using till the end. The next important thing what you need to know after your hypothesis, a working hypothesis is formulated is how can you frame research questions or how do you frame your objectives. All this is the most important step under planning. So if you do this planning perfectly, all other things fall in place. The next important thing what you need to know is the usage of your sampling technique and who will be your sample, that is what is your category of respondents. So deciding on this, taking a decision on this also again is very, very important. So this is what we discussed in the second session. In the third session, we discussed all about review of literature. That is, what are the various types of review of literature? How do you go with along with a review of literature? The most important thing what you need to do, as I suggested, please have Mendeley software in your desktop so that whenever you're writing a review of literature, make sure that you already have the bibliography with you, so that the bibliography gets generated automatically under Mendeley, or you can also take up Zotero. Both are considerably very good. you will have in elsewhere you will have an email account, so it's just like your email. So whenever you want, you can open that, and you can keep all your research papers under different folders based on your constructs. This is how you maintain your review of literature. Please make sure that you're quite systematic while you're doing review of literature. And one more thing, what I told you is, when you're dividing the chapters as review of literature, it must be based on your constructs. So all your constructs must have that review. That means to say, from when exactly this concept started and to this day, what is the research that is being conducted. So entirely you have to do it on a chronological basis. It must also be based on the APA style. That is, please go through the APA PDF, which will give you the details all about the 6th edition. So in Google, if you just type as 6th edition of APA, you will get how you have to do the presentation. This is something that is again very important for you. And while you're doing the review, what all is that you need to know? Please make sure that you first study what is the aim of the study, what are the methods that the researcher has adopted, and what ultimately is the findings of the research. So each one, try and make it as a paragraph and keep it along with you. I told you, at least for one construct, you should be able to have a rough working review of literature of at least 150 articles. So that's how later on, once you finalize your data analysis, you have to again go back to review of literature. At that stage, you will be able to find out what exactly will go to your research and what you have to delete it as unwanted. But while you are doing review of literature, please remember, everything is needed. So whatever article you take, make sure that you are able to prepare a paragraph of that and then keep it with you whenever you require it for data analysis. This will be important, because whenever you are analyzing the data and you are interpreting the results, it must be backed by review of literature. So I told you, review of literature is very important, used from the stage of introduction to the stage of conclusion. So at all phases, you are going to use review of literature. And at whatever stage you are doing research, please remember, on a daily basis, you must do review of literature. You must do review of literature. So this is what we discussed in the previous class. And one more thing, today I have with me Miss Soumya, who will be helping me out. I gave you some details regarding publication. So she will be showing you on screen sharing about Schimago. So if you just go to Google, type Schimago, type Schimago rankings, you will go to that particular website. So once you go to that particular website, you will get the details. Again, can you type AE? So if you go to Schimago rankings, you can just go to all subject areas, and in that just give business management and accounting. So you will get all the research the journals under business management and accounting. So as you keep going, you in the initial page, they first start off with Q1. So you can look at you can take a look at the Q1 journals. Of course, by the time we go to Q3, I think it will take a very long time. So, if you come down, you just have to go click to the next page, and again you get a list. Now, please note also there's a H index that is given. Now, for individual writers, again, as faculty members, please note if you are initially starting off, I think a H index of 4 to 5 is something that is adequate for you. And if somebody who really wants to focus on good papers, who's able to do it, I think for them around 15 to 20, you should be able to go up to 15 to 20 for that particular H index. Similarly, you have for even ABDC rankings also.
Very good.
Okay, so let us continue with this. Now, the next step after review of literature, what is that you need to do? Now, what happens is many researchers at every point of time they start, they get stuck. So one stage is this: after the research plan, next they do not know what to do. Now, please remember that once your research plan is ready, the next important step is to look into, already you know which is the method again for, whichever method that you are going to follow, whether you're going to follow the qualitative method or the quantitative method. And if it is a qualitative method, remember that your method of data collection will be observation method or it will be interview method. So if you are using a grounded theory, or if you are using ethnography studies or any kind of other types of studies like action research and all that, for that you will be using observation and interview. Now, as far as quantitative research is concerned, the most important technique that is used to collect primary data mainly is through questionnaires. Today, we not many people use the word questionnaire. They use it as a research instrument. So don't be scared that whenever people are using the word measuring instrument or a research instrument, that's nothing but your questionnaire. Okay. Now, preparing a questionnaire is probably the most important part of any research. So what I would like to tell is this is where your review of literature actually, is used. Always keep 2 to 3 papers which are very, very close to your research. This is something that is very important. Apart from all other researches, whatever review you have done, in that you should be able to relate 2 or 3 papers which are quite close to your research. Now make sure that from those kind of researches, you are able to check what are the constructs, what are the dimensions, and what are the variables used. Now you should be able to, on a rough note, on the basis of your objectives, for each and every construct, you should be able to prepare 15 questions at least. So based on review of literature, based on your objectives, you should be able to formulate at least 15 questions for each and every dimension. So let us say, for example, for every construct, you have taken 6 dimensions or 7 dimensions or 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions. So for each and every dimension, variable is nothing but an item. So for every item, again, you should be able to frame certain questions. Now coming to measuring instruments, one thing personally I would like to suggest, if the topic has already been done and if a scale has already been developed, please don't waste your time on scale development. Please do not waste your time on scale development. Let us say, for example, I think I've sent on WhatsApp, there is a particular scale called as organizational learning capabilities. There is a scale that is developed by a person called as Chiva. Okay. And then I've also sent you something called as the role assessment survey. Now that is something that has already been done by Dave Ulrich. Now what is the purpose of these measuring instruments is that they have already been validated. The scale has already been developed and it has already been validated. So you need not validate it again. But however, if you're doing something very unique, there has been no scale that has been developed for it, yes, then please go for a scale development. Then go for a scale development. And when you are doing preparing a scale, one of the objectives of your research must be development and validation of the scale. And once you validate it, I'm not telling by face validation, I'm telling it is through statistical analysis. So for a scale development and validation, we use the analysis of factor analysis. That is, we do exploratory factor analysis, confirmatory factor analysis, available in SPSS or R. Until and unless it is done, you cannot have a questionnaire. You cannot have a research instrument. Please remember that. That is where your quality comes into picture. So if you are developing a new scale, if you're taking up a very, very new area, okay, now let us say, for example, there were people who came up with organizational citizenship behavior initially. So there will be people who would have coined that term. So that is their conceptualization or that is their idea. Now let us say, for example, they are developing a tool for organizational citizenship behavior, keeping some 5 dimensions. Now, if they are doing that, the first process for them will be scale development and scale validation. Now, that will be their first paper. So, initially, if you are very interested in developing and validating a scale, you can publish that first. That also will become your publication. So, please note that this is something that is very, very important for a researcher. Now, you might find very many textbooks which will give you, like what I've given, what is the relevant content. Relevant content means it must relate to your dimensions and your each and every item must be a part of your objective. That is it satisfying my objective? That should be the question that always the researcher should put whenever you're writing every question. Okay, and never write or. In a question, you cannot have 2 questions. This is one major mistake people make. And please remember, in a questionnaire, there are 2 types. One is where you make it as a statement, and the second one is when you ask it like a question. If one time you are using questions everywhere it must be, the entire instrument must be based on questions only. If you're doing it based on statements, the entire questionnaire should be statements. You cannot have both together. And order of the questions, definitely it is based on your constructs. So you start with, let us say in the previous class I gave you the example of role of HR practices, okay, wherein I told you can take the dimension of induction, you can take the dimension of training, you can take the dimension of compensation, motivation. Now each one becomes a dimension, and for each dimension you're going to frame what is called as items. Now for each item you have to make sure that it is related to what was the consequence. The consequence was employee well-being. So each question has to relate to the concept of employee well-being. This is something that is very, very important, and try and see to that the questions are very, very specific. And it's not one time, two times. You have to get it consulted from as many people as possible. So there also, please don't go to people like each and every person and start asking your peers whatever whether I've done this, is it right or wrong. Never do that. Until and unless you feel that that person is worth it, you give them a questionnaire, somebody who can understand, especially English faculty, English, somebody who knows English literature, get it evaluated from them also. Okay, so this is about the research instrument. So make sure that whatever instrument that you have prepared, it satisfies your objectives as well as your title. Now after you finish that, what next? So you have prepared a research plan, you have done review of literature, you have done a measuring instrument. Now after that, what? Now after that you do a pilot studies. Now what do you mean by pilot studies? That is taking a very small portion of your entire population and testing the validity and reliability of that research instrument. Now please remember, if you have already taken an instrument that has been already validated and developed, you might ask me why again it has to be validated. Of course, as a process of research, just to make sure that under our circumstances, under our sample conditions, it can be used for that particular purpose, you have to validate it again. Okay, so for pilot studies, please remember why mainly we conduct a pilot study is for the purpose of validity and reliability. This is the main thing that every researcher must do. Now as soon as I use the word validity and reliability, everybody is quite worried that it sounds statistics, and most researchers I've seen whenever I use the word statistics, they say that okay, this is something out of our research area. Or some people, if you go to Gen X, they would say statistics is not something that is made. Now whenever I tell that whenever you're doing a quantitative study, of course quantitative, because you're doing quantitative, because you're doing a correlational research, of course statistics is important, because your entire hypothesis is based on that. Suppose you're doing a qualitative research, yes, at that time you need not much bother about statistics. But when we use the word statistics, the first important thing is people start thinking about Z-test, chi-square test, ANOVA. The first thing that they ask, do you know ANOVA? Do you know chi-square test? Sorry to say this, but first please understand what statistics is, and for a researcher, what is that part of statistics that we must learn. So today I will be telling you for research what statistics is required, what you need to know. So based on that, you can study books, you can understand what exactly is required for statistics. That's for research. That's all. You need not know more about statistics. So the first important thing is testing of validity and reliability. Now what do you mean by validity? Now validity is the effectiveness of an instrument to measure what actually it intends to measure. Now previously I gave you an example. Now let us say a thermometer. Thermometer can measure only the temperature. It cannot measure the length or the height or the weight. It cannot do that. But what happens is they are all quantitative instruments of measurement. Very easy for me to say it's a thermometer, it's a ruler, it's a weighing scale and all that. But when does the problem arise? The problem arises in social and psychological research where the concepts are abstract. So when concepts are abstract, I cannot use the same abstract concepts in preparing my questionnaire. I have to make them measurable. So when I'm making them measurable, I know that I should come to know that whatever I am measuring is actually measuring what I intend to measure. So for that, there are three types of validity. Now, the first type of validity is called as content validity. Again, content validity is what usually all researchers follow. That is, you look into it. It's something like your face validity. You look into it, or you ask some particular experts to look into it. Make sure that it's a good questionnaire, and then you go ahead in collecting data, which is a very, very wrong process. Okay, today most of our papers have not been accepted by international journals or by foreign universities. This is the main reason, because they will follow this process of scale development and validation. Okay, the second important type is your predictive validity. Of course, this is for validities for a future outcome, or an outcome which is future based. For that we use predictive validity. But the most important for social science research is our construct validity. As the name itself tells you, it is the construct validity. Now, under construct validity, there are two important things. One is called as the discriminant validity, and the second one is called as the convergent validity. So as a researcher, I'm trying to just minimize what exactly you need to know. You exactly need to know only two things. One is discriminant validity and the second one is convergent validity. So if you are able to remember these two terms, it is more than enough. Now, what do you mean by discriminant validity? Now, what happens in the constructs is some constructs are related and some constructs are not at all related. Now here, if I see what is the role of HR practices and employee well-being, they are interrelated concepts. Okay, now there might be some very dissimilar constructs. So what is suppose you are finding out the validity for that, then the discriminant validity or the correlation coefficient that you are finding out. Please remember, for everything you are finding out correlation. So there is nothing called as finding out discriminant validity and there is no formula for that. Okay, so while you are doing discriminant validity, you are finding out the correlation coefficient between two constructs. So in that, if you find out that between dissimilar constructs, the correlation is very high, then it's very good. That means to say your validity is good. Suppose it is convergent validity, you are trying to find out how much they are similar. Okay, that is called as a convergent validity. You're trying to find out between the constructs how much they are similar. Again, here there is one concept called as AVE. Okay, average variance extract. This for this you need not do it. You can consult a statistician for this in SPSS. If you go to CFA, that is exploratory factor analysis or confirmatory factor analysis, they will do this AVE and give you all that you as a researcher should find out is that convergent validity, whether the relationship is very high or not. Okay, so that is what you as a researcher need to find out. Now the last one is nomological validity. Now that just establishes the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable and the focal point. So the focal point usually is your mediator or your moderator. Okay, so this is about validity. So what is that you need to know under validity? You need to know whether there is a relationship among the constructs. So for that you have to find out the convergent validity, and for that if you calculate AVE, this is sufficient. So don't think too much about validity, because this is only testing the research instrument. So you're just trying to find out whether it satisfies, your instrument satisfies your test of validity and reliability. It is sufficient. Now the next thing what you need to do is reliability. Now what do you mean by reliability? Reliability means every time that you are measuring whether it is giving you consistent results. That is called as reliability. Now before I move on to errors, I'll just of course, the difference between reliability and validity is given. Validity is something that is very important than reliability, because reliability means consistency of results. Sometimes your instrument may not be valid, but it might be giving you consistent results. So what is that? That the first thing you need to look into in a research instrument is the validity. Once the validity is there, then you can go in for reliability. Now, under reliability, there are three important things that you need to know. Okay, there are three types. One is the test-retest method. That means to say every time you are testing it, is it giving you the same results? This is what you need to know. The second thing what you need to know is the measurement of your raters or your whatever the observers. That is, every time when it's given to different iterators, are you getting the same type of results? Now, what is important is the third one, that is the internal consistency. Now, for this is what we do statistical reliability test. Okay, so as a researcher, you need to know about internal consistency. Internal consistency is about the actual measurement itself. Okay, so for that is where we use what is called as the Cronbach alpha. So Cronbach alpha is a technique, or it is a value that is used for measuring the internal consistency, and most researchers use Cronbach alpha. Of course, there's one more called as McDonald's omega, which is almost similar to your Cronbach alpha. Now again, Cronbach alpha, it's a measure which helps you to find out the consistency. That means to say, is it giving constant results? So there also in Cronbach alpha, if the value is pretty more than 0.7, okay, correlation value for each of your variables, then you consider that your research instrument is fine and you can go ahead for collecting the data from the larger population. So please do remember that Cronbach alpha, the value should be about 0.7 up to 0.9. Okay, that is considered as something that is good, and you can go ahead. Now, you as a researcher, don't worry about calculating Cronbach alpha. If you know SPSS, there you can go to analyze, and I think once you give all the variables, you can Google that, how to find out Cronbach alpha in SPSS. If you are familiar with SPSS, you can go and do that calculation by entering all your variables. Otherwise, don't break your head on calculating Cronbach alpha. As a researcher, all that you can do is give it to a statistician and get the Cronbach alpha value. Of course, interpretation, see, ultimately, values don't matter. How you interpret it in your research is what matters. Now, let us say the previous results, okay, previous studies, in all that, their results, they have got 0.5 as the Cronbach alpha, and they have told that reliability is good. Now, you can't be waiting and saying, no, mine, I got only 0.6. I will not consider this as reliable. No. If that's why I'm telling you, take out the previous studies, check whether the Cronbach alpha is good or not. If whatever is the previous studies, if they are giving that, okay, this value is sufficient, then go for that value. That you will know only if you have read previous literatures and you know exactly what it is. Okay, so hope you guys now have understood what is reliability and what is validity. What is the difference between validity and reliability? So what it intends to measure, if it is measuring, it is called as validity, and if it keeps giving consistent results, then it is called as reliability. Now, if you're taking, let us say, a sample of 500, as a major population sample, then maybe for a pilot study you could use around 80 to 100 samples. So you can do the test for 80 to 100 samples, which is sufficient, and you can go ahead now and for data collection. Okay, so you measure only two things. For validity, you measure your convergent validity and your discriminant validity, and for reliability, you measure the internal consistency. Of course, I think in R, if you go, there is one measure called as composite reliability, which will automatically be calculated when you're doing SEM. So even that is a good measure instead of Cronbach alpha. So if people are doing structural equation model in their research, they can also use a thing called as composite reliability. So that also can be taken as a measure for internal consistency. So this is regarding your reliability and validity. I hope this is clear for you. Now, what is that next you are going to do? So next you are going to collect the data. Please remember, my professor, Dr. Rajesh Kumar, always would say on a daily basis, whenever you are collecting data, make sure that you prepare an Excel sheet. Okay, and for each of your items, please give a number. So based on those numbers, I give an identity to each one of the items, and on a daily basis, please keep recording. Otherwise, imagine having 500 questionnaires together and trying to enter the data in the Excel sheet really becomes tedious. Okay, so as far as possible, make sure that on a daily basis, assign numbers to each and every of your items, and make sure that you enter. Now, for that, I'll just give you an example maybe. Now, let us say you are considering class intervals. Let us say for income. So, if your income is, less than 1 lakh, okay, and then you have an income of 1 lakh to 5 lakhs. And you have income of 5 lakh to 10 lakh, and you have an income of 10 lakh and above. So this is the class intervals that you have made when it comes to interval data. Okay, so please go back, remember to what I've told you: nominal data, ordinal data, interval, and ratio. So out of that, this is something that is very important, which helps you in doing what is called as continuous data. So continuous data is something that is very important for your inferential analysis. So let us say I have data like this. I assign numbers. So this will be 1, this will be 2, this will be 3, and this will be 4. So for all intervals, you have to give numbers like this. So for each and every variable, each and every item, give a number. Let us say, for example, if it is gender, okay, you start with Q1. The second question is designation, you give it as Q2. If the third question is based on education qualification, give it as Q3. If the income level is the next question, give it as Q4. So for every question, you have to have a number. Okay, you assign a alpha numerical value so that it becomes easy for you. Now, once you assign, while you're entering data, you're not going to enter data. Suppose some person has ticked it from, given that he earns income from 1 lakh to 5 lakh. So what is the number you're going to write? So if they put a tick under 1 lakh to 5 lakh, you're going to write the number 2. So like that for each and every question. And please remember, for a Likert scale, entering data like this becomes very, very easy for you. Okay, and once you have entered all the data, it's very easy for you to do statistical analysis. Of course, if there are any well-processing data, if there are any outliers, that means to say there are extreme values, you can take out those kind of values. You need to figure out what has to be done with the missing values. Again, for all this, I tell you, once you have prepared the data sheet, please go and consult a statistician as to what has to be done. See, we are not experts. Please remember, we are doing research. So we will be more professed in the topic that we are doing. Say, for example, I will be more professed in HRM if I'm doing HRM as my specialization, or somebody in finance, or somebody in marketing. So we are not specialists in statistics. So that's the reason I'm telling, please consult them at every stage. Especially when you've prepared a research instrument, show it to them, ask them whether what are the statistical analysis that has to be used. But simultaneously, please remember, they do not know your research. So don't 100% rely on statisticians, because they know only statistics, they don't know your research. So as a researcher, I'm not telling you should be an expert in statistics, but definitely you should have a basic understanding of statistics. This is something that is very important. If you do not know, please, there's nothing that you have to again attend a workshop. Please know, you can definitely study basic first +1, +2 statistics textbook. I think that will really give you an idea of what statistics is. That's why I'm telling you, don't get scared whenever the word statistics is used. Definitely not. It's very, very simple compared to writing of your research report. That is the toughest of all. In fact, the flow of language, according to me, was the toughest, because you must use technical words. So that is very difficult. Statistical analysis is difficult, writing is difficult, interpretation is difficult, but calculations are definitely not difficult, because anyway today we have lots of software available for that. R and SPSS is meant for that. So please don't break your head on calculating. Okay. But what I'm trying to tell you is, suppose you are good at it. Say you know in SPSS how to calculate chi-square, how to calculate Cronbach alpha, you may do it. Not required that you have to show it to a statistician. But why I'm telling be very particular is because when we are doing inferential statistics, we will definitely require their help. We will definitely require their help, because I cannot do EFA under AMOS. It's very difficult for me. I may learn what it is. Then there's another software, I will not know how to do it. So maybe under our package, I only remember that there are 2 packages, Psych and Lavan, which are used for the purpose of our social sciences. That's all I remember. So, coding, it's almost like Java. You should know how to write. So that, maybe for us, it might be difficult. Of course, youngsters can learn, but at a later stage it might be difficult for people like us. So depending on a statistician is no issues when it comes to inferential statistics. Okay, so once you have tabulated the entire data, this is where your data analysis starts. Okay, and for data analysis, please remember, there are 2 types, major types of analysis. One is your descriptive statistics and the other one is your inferential statistics. This is where people go wrong. They feel that once they've calculated the mean and the standard deviation, they write the analysis and interpretation. Please no. Descriptive statistics is only for demographic profiles, not for hypothesis testing. And inferential statistics can be done mainly with your interval data. Of course, it can be done. There are some tests which can be used for nominal data and ordinal data, but mainly inferential statistics uses interval data. So very, very important, you understand the distinction between what is descriptive statistics and what is inferential statistics. Now, again, what is data analysis? Again, it is nothing but trying to take the information what is being collected and giving meaningful suggestions. Trying to describe the data is descriptive statistics. Trying to draw conclusions out of the data collected is called as inferential statistics. So try to understand the difference. If describing the data itself is your objective of the research, then you can use descriptive statistics. But most of the researchers, especially for testing of hypothesis, use inferential statistics. So try to understand the difference between what is descriptive statistics and what is inferential statistics. So identifying the difference between these two is very, very important. So what I will be doing is I will be stopping at this PPT here because I want to give you some basics of statistics. What is that you need to know under statistics? So tomorrow what we will be doing is we will be doing entirely on this. So univariate, bivariate and multivariate. So I will be giving you, you can just see the slides. I'll be giving you an entire detail of this slide. Okay. So an entire detail of this, what is bivariate and what is multivariate. I have also prepared one slide which exclusively is for the statistical tools. So I will be explaining this also, that is for what you have to explain, what is the test that you have to use. So this is what I will be doing tomorrow. Okay, so this main thing I will be covering tomorrow. I think by tomorrow you will have a very good idea about what test has to be used where. And this is what as researchers we need to know. Okay, so it's okay if I don't know how to do SEM, even I don't know how to do, but I know exactly what it is and where it has to be used. That is what is more important for a researcher. Okay, so now we will move on to the basic statistics. That means to say that for testing of hypothesis, what statistics you need to know. So as far as inferential statistics is required, what are the tests that you need to know? I will cover it tomorrow. That is the various correlation, regression, path analysis, SEM and all that. But as of now, I will be telling you exactly what extent of statistics you need to know. Okay, what is the extent that you need to know? So what is statistics? Now please remember, statistics is only an estimate. So statistics only does two things. One is estimation and one is prediction. So please go back to +1 textbooks. For us that is sufficient as researchers. If you understand, statistics is based entirely on estimation. Now what happens is, we as researchers we want to study a large population. We cannot do that. It's humanly very impossible, because mainly it will be a problem with respect to time, with respect to the budget, all sorts of problems for us. So what we do is, we cannot study the entire population. So we take a part of the population which is called as a sample. Okay, so we take only a part of the population which is called as a sample. Now, so for that, we have two statistical laws which are extremely important for us as a researcher to know. The first law is the law of statistical regularity, and the second law is the law of inertia of large numbers. Now, what is the first law? That is law of statistical regularity. Now, that law states that suppose you are taking a sample out of a population. The characteristics of a population, okay, what you are having, and the characteristics of the sample that you are taking, more or less the characteristics of the sample will be the characteristics of the population. This is the first law that we have to understand. All our inferences will be based on this. So what is the main thing that we need to know as researchers? Whatever is the sample characteristics of the sample, that is the characteristics of the population also. This is the first thing that we need to know. The second thing what we need to know is see, I'm having an infinite population. I cannot take a large sample. Okay, if it's a finite population, I'm able to take it as fine. Now, what is the sample? The sample is the representation of the population. So, what this law states is, higher the sample size, the results will be more accurate. Lower the sample size, the results will be less accurate. This is the second theory. So, these are the only two statistical laws that we need to know as researchers. Now, the second important thing what you need to know is about these parameters. So, the parameter for mean of a population is denoted by mu, and the standard deviation for the population is denoted by this standard deviation symbol. Okay? Now coming to the sample. The sample mean is denoted by x bar, and the standard deviation for the sample is denoted by S. This is all you need to know. Okay, so don't worry if a textbook gives you too many numbers. We just need to know this. So what is the parameters for mean and standard deviation when it comes to population? What are the parameters when it comes to the sample? This is what we need to know. Now, the next important thing as researchers, what we need to know are called as sample errors. This is something which we will definitely tend to make. Now, what happens is, the actual value of, a statistical, test will be different for a population, and what we find out will be different. That's because there are various sampling errors that we might make. Okay. Now, what are the reason for these kind of sampling errors is because our selection of sample. That's why I'm telling you, our sampling technique is something that is very, very important here. So suppose you're doing a quantitative study, let us say I told you, suppose you're doing something on students. You tend to do an accidental sampling. You tend to do a convenience sampling. It is wrong. Suppose you've not taken stratas. Suppose you're doing something relating to the overall population and you have not done area sampling. Your sampling errors are bound to happen. Okay, so as far as possible, suppose the population itself is very heterogeneous, then again automatically you will have sampling errors. Now these sampling errors can either be biased or they can be unbiased. Okay, now when unbiased errors, we cannot do anything. It is it occurs because of various other reasons. Okay, now what mainly we are concerned as researchers is the biased errors. Okay, that is why whenever we take a sample, again the second principle, law of inertia of large numbers, this is where we have to see that considerably the population, the sample size is quite large. So if you remember what I told you in the first class, when it comes to the size of the sample, how do you calculate the size of the sample? Now this is called as the standard error. Now this S is called as the standard error. Okay, so how do you, the standard deviation of the sample, whatever is taken, and this is called as the standard error. Now, how do you find out the standard error? Now, standard error, we find it out as X. Now, how do we find out this? This is nothing but the standard deviation divided by the square root of the sample size. Now this again, if we change it, we get the sample size. So n is our sample size. Now taking n as our sample size, when we take this to the other side, we get S square, divide this by the S, that is the standard error of X square. So because it was root here, once the root goes to the other side, it becomes a square. So this is how you calculate your sample size. Again, the most important decision that a researcher has to take is how big a standard error he can tolerate. So, or what is his extent of precision. If his extent of precision is very high, then the sample size also has to be large. So please remember this. Whenever you're, that's where it depends on the researcher. If you want high precision, make sure that your sample size is large. This is the ultimate conclusion what we can draw. Okay. Now the next important thing as researchers, and this is something that is very, very important. This is called as the 68, 95, 99 principle. And this is what as researchers we need to know. That is the normal distribution. Now, what do we mean by a normal distribution? Now, what happens is whenever we are drawing samples, various samples from the population, let us say the population is 1000, and I've been drawing samples, various samples, let us say of 200, of 300, I've been drawing different samples. Now, the sample means when I am plotting this, on the basis of statistical assumptions, this comes as a bell-shaped curve. All means that are plotted on the line here, the means of the samples of a particular population comes in this form of bell shape, where the population mean will be here in the middle. Okay. Now, you will have some standard deviations. That means to say that my sample mean, one mean can come here. Let us say it comes here. My sample mean. Now, what happens is, I need to find out what is the standard deviation. Okay, so the standard deviation is usually the distance here. Okay, the deviation. Now, if the deviation is one standard deviation, if the deviation is one standard deviation, we are taking that one standard deviation here. And this is called as 2 standard deviation. So this is the standard deviation. Now, this area comprises of 34%. If it's one standard deviation, okay, this is 34%. So the total of this becomes 68%. So what this states is, on an average, the samples, when they are plotted, the sample means when they are plotted, they usually lie between one standard deviation. That means to say, if I have one standard deviation on both the sides, that is the positive side as well as the negative side, it means that 34% on my right hand side and 34% on my left hand side together, within 68% of the area, my sample means will lie. Okay, that is called as one standard deviation. Now, if it is 2 standard deviations, it means that, let us take, this is 2 standard deviation. This is 1 standard deviation. This is 2 standard deviation. 1, 2 standard deviation. So for 2 standard deviation, this will be the area. Now, this area covers 95%. That means to say, if my means are falling in this area, this entire area, it means that this is the level of significance. This is the confidence level. That means to say, I very well know that all my means of my samples will lie between this area, if it is 2 standard deviation. If it is 2.6, please remember this bell curve never touches the line here. That is why we always show it as never touching. So here, suppose I go with another standard deviation here. This I take it as 99%. That means to say, suppose it's falling in 2.6 standard deviation. This is 2.6 standard deviation. That means to say that all the means of my sample will fall between 99% area. So this is called as 99% area. Okay, so this is 34, I don't know, half, I think it's 47.5 and 47.5 to become 95%, and 2.6 standard deviation will become 99%. Now these are called as confidence levels or significance levels. So if I'm 95% confident, it means that my means, okay, will fall in the range of 2 standard deviation to 2 standard deviation. We will have only a maximum of 2 standard deviation. Okay, if it's 2 standard deviation, it means that my sample means will lie within this 95% area. Now this is something that is very, very important for a researcher. Now why? Because we have to have our level of significance. We have to find out what our level of significance is. Okay, so this is the middle is our population mean, but our sample mean may lie within any area. So we have to estimate whether we are going to take 95% confidence level, or we are going to take 95% confidence level, or we are going to take 99% confidence level. This is what as a researcher we have to decide. So again, I'm not going to go into details of a normal distribution. Of course, you can take that from any statistics book and read what are the, mainly it's a bell-shaped curve. Okay, and you can also find out, as the bell-shaped curves becomes flat, what will be the kind of results that happen if the bell-shaped curve is, a little tall. What are the effects? All that you can Google it out. And please remember, for statistics, there are wonderful YouTube videos that are available. Simple topics. Let us say you don't know what a hypothesis is. Click on a YouTube video. Don't Google and get matter. Click on a YouTube video. There are very good kind of, like how small children have explanations. Statistics also has been explained in that particular way. So you can also take that. So what is the most important thing for a researcher I need to know is what is my level of significance and what is my confidence levels. Now I will come directly to what is hypothesis testing. Now, hypothesis testing, many of them will be asking, what is null hypothesis? What is alternate hypothesis? As a researcher, what we need to know is the null hypothesis. That is the main thing as a researcher, what I need to know. Okay. Now, what do you mean by null hypothesis? Now, null hypothesis means you are having a certain premises and there is a disagreement for that premises, that is called as the null hypothesis. Now that disagreement can be either no relationship or no significant difference. Okay. Now there is some disagreement. Now let us say, for example, there is no significant difference between, let us say, the IQ level of urban and rural students. So I'm starting with the premises saying that there is no significant difference between the IQ level of urban and rural students. That is my null hypothesis. Please remember, framing of null hypothesis is important. Alternatively, you prepare what is called as the alternative hypothesis, or H1 is prepared. Okay. So the most important thing for a researcher is to prepare your null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. The second important thing what you need to know is selecting the desired level of significance, which I told you just now. That is, you have to find out what is that level of significance, whether you're going to take 5%, 10% or 1% as your level of significance. Okay, this is the second step what you will have to do. So first, frame your null hypothesis and your alternate hypothesis. Second important thing is, whatever is the level of significance, you're going to determine that level of significance. The third important thing what you're going to do is perform an appropriate statistical test. Now for this statistical test, of course, these are all what are the factors determining for choosing a test. Now this is where your p-value comes into picture. Okay. What is p-value? P-value is the probability value of an error. P-value is the probability value of an error. Many people, they get confused on what is that p-value, what is that p-value. P-value is the probability value of an error. Now what happens is, see, what is your ultimate aim? Is your ultimate aim to prove that your null hypothesis is true? No. Our main aim is to see to that how much of our data disagrees with the null hypothesis. This is what, as a researcher, I want to know. And please remember, disagreement with the null hypothesis does not mean acceptance of the alternate hypothesis. This is something where people, write very wrongly when it comes to interpretations. Ultimately, as a researcher, what I'm trying to do is I am trying to disagree with the null hypothesis. This is all I need to know. So some people are very worried about type 1 error, type 2 error. Don't bother about all that. Ultimately, as a researcher, I need to know that my observed data should not accept the null hypothesis. That means to say my observed data should be something different from the null hypothesis. Now, if I say that there is no significant difference between the IQ of urban students and rural students, what is the use of me collecting what is the IQ level of each and every student? I should show that there isn't some disagreement. I should show that the IQ level of urban students is more than IQ level of rural students, or something like that. Something I just have to falsify my null hypothesis. This is what is important for a researcher. Now, to falsify my null hypothesis, what I require is called as type 1 error. So what do you mean by type 1 error? The probability of rejecting a null hypothesis when it is true is called as alpha. Alpha is nothing but your type 1 error. Of course, once we do the type 1 error, I think that itself is sufficient for us. Probability of accepting this null hypothesis when it is false is something that is negative in nature. So we will go in for the positive one, that is probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true. So this is what we are going to do. And if we do this, this is called as the power of a test. So what is the power of a test? So when I'm rejecting the null hypothesis, when it is it has to be rejected, that is called as a power of a test. So power of a test is something that is very, very important for us. So what is the first thing that we came to know? Form the null hypothesis. Second thing, determine the level of its significance. Third thing is we have to find out this p-value now. This is the third important thing what we need to know. Now, how do we know about this p-value? This p-value is something that is many times what happens is, muted. Now, many a times what happens is, if the p-value is small, there is more disagreement with the null hypothesis. When the p-value is high, there is less disagreement with the null hypothesis. So what happens is our p-value must be small. Our p-value must be small. Only then we say that the data, whatever we have collected, it is incompatible with the null hypothesis. That is what we want. What is that we want as researchers? We want that our data should disagree with the null hypothesis. That is what we have to know. Okay. Now let us say I am taking a particular, alpha I can take alpha at any value. Okay. If I can take alpha as 5%, I can take alpha at 1%, I can take alpha at 10%. Now, ultimately what I have to do is I have to make sure that my p-value is less. Okay. Now this p-value, where I will get this p-value? No. This p-value I have to find out from tables. Now how do I find out this p-value from tables? That depends on what test I'm taking. I have separate p-values for t-test, I have separate p-value for f-test, I have separate p-value for chi-square test. So that p-value I have to see from the table. Now this A, how do I determine? I determine it by my level of significance. So based on my level of significance, whether I'm taking it 5%, 1% or 10%, I'm going to find out what is my alpha value. Let us say I take it at 5%. Now 95% and 5% is my A value, my alpha value. So 5% means it will be 0.05. So if my P value is less than 0.05, that P value I have to find out. Now this means that what is ultimately the outcome of that? This means that there is a significant difference between the groups. Now whenever there is a significant difference, please remember our null hypothesis gets rejected. So what is that? As a researcher I have to see? I have to see that my P value is less than the which value? Alpha value. So if my P value is less than my alpha value, then my null hypothesis gets rejected. If my P value is more than my alpha value, my null hypothesis gets accepted. So this is what you need to know. And this is something that is very, very important for testing of hypothesis. Now, these are the other two concepts that you need to know. Again, you can take out a lot of textbooks and learn this. What is degree of freedom? Degree of freedom is very important in the table. So when you're finding out in the table, n-1, that is where you will need that number. And then which test you're doing, whether you're doing a one-tail or a two-tail. That is very important for you. Now, what test has to be used when? Now, I hope you have understood what is a normal distribution. Now, remember, if it is a normal distribution, we must use a parametric test. If it is a non-normal distribution, then we have to use non-parametric test. Non-parametric test is only used for ordinal data and nominal data, whereas your parametric test is used for ordinal data and interval data. This is what you need to know. So now you come to know about what are the parametric tests and what are the non-parametric tests. So I will stop at this for today. I know it's been a very tough task for you to take in statistics, but believe me, it is the easiest of all. So this is what you need to know as a researcher. This table, what I'm showing, this I will explain it tomorrow. So tomorrow what we are going to do is understand what is parametric and non-parametric and all this inferential statistics. Why I've left it at this particular point, why I've stopped it at this particular point is both are related. So because both are related, I've taken it under two separate headings. And one, I've tried to cover statistics separately and I've tried to cover data analysis separately. I know there are a lot of doubts. I don't even know whether there would be doubts because, you get doubts only when you either don't understand anything or, you've understood fully. So my sincere request to you is, again, tomorrow you'll get better clarity. Don't worry. I will recap what I have done today and also tomorrow I will take it forward and complete data analysis for you. Now what I'm planning on Wednesday is, please let me know in the chat box if all of you agree to this. I'm not planning to teach you report writing. I will show you a thesis. I will exactly go through the thesis and show you how review of literature has to be written, how data analysis has to be written. I will just give you the rough draft of my thesis. So, you can all go through it. I'll share the PPT with you maybe tomorrow, because I want to finish tomorrow's session also, and I will send it across to you. Please remember statistics. I just want to tell one thing: whenever there is statistics, please don't run away from it, because that's what I used to do initially. I used to stop at statistics, so never do that. Always, it's a wonderful subject for a researcher to interpret, and that is where our expertise lies. So we have to become experts in that. So make sure. Tomorrow again, I will finish up with the statistical part of it, and day after tomorrow, we will wind up with writing of a research report. So any doubts, as I told you, you can always send me a mail, and I can clear your queries. So thank you.